Hi everyone, I'm the Tax Pro, and today we're going to talk about a common misconception that I hear that if you are allowed to file taxes, that you must have some sort of training or some sort of credential or something along those lines. A lot of people don't actually realize that anybody can file taxes. It's a little scary. So anybody is allowed to file a tax return in the US for the IRS, like to the federal government. Um, Paid preparers are just required to get a PTIN, which is a preparer tax identification number. So right here on the screen, you'll see PTIN holders. These are essentially tax preparers who go online, and sometimes you have to pay a fee, some years you don't. It just kind of depends on the year and what's going on legally with the IRS. Sometimes you have to pay a small fee, sometimes you don't. And when I say a small fee, I mean sometimes it's like $15. So sometimes you got to pay a couple bucks to essentially say, hey, I'm going to register as a PTIN holder, and then they give you an identification number. And that identification number goes on every tax return that you prepare, or it should. Now we also have what we call ghost preparers that refuse to put their PTIN on things because they're doing shady things. But if you're doing it legitimately, you would go and you would get a PTIN, okay? You don't have to have any sort of training. You don't have to have any sort of education. You don't have to have any sort of experience. You can just go get a PTIN. Anybody can go get one. At that point in time, you can file tax returns before the IRS. Little scary. A lot of people assume like you have to be a CPA or something along those lines. Nope, anybody can file a tax return. However, you do have to have credentials in order to represent a taxpayer before the IRS. And what that means is if a taxpayer is audited or has some sort of correspondence from the IRS, you do have to have some form of credentials in order to communicate back and forth with the IRS on that taxpayer's behalf. Okay? So, but to file them and prepare them, you just need a PTIN. Certain states require that you have some additional training or education, or that you pass a competency test. There's like a handful of states now that have that, which is very good for our industry because obviously we don't want people who are not, capable filing tax returns. But there is actually no requirement to file and prepare federal tax returns outside of having a PTIN. As a matter of fact, there is a case, the Loving versus IRS case, where people challenged the IRS's authority to regulate tax return preparers. And essentially what ended up happening was that the IRS was found to not have the ability to regulate tax preparers. Now they can regulate individuals who represent taxpayers before the IRS, but they are actually not allowed to prevent an individual from being allowed to file tax returns. So this was the Loving versus IRS case. Very interesting case. And there are cases where, people have committed fraud and they have stolen from people before, and they are still allowed to go get a PTIN. And they are still allowed to prepare tax returns. So a really not common fact that a lot of people just don't know that this is a thing. There is a very, very large chance that you're a tax preparer, unless you know that they're a CPA or an EA or an attorney, there is a very large chance that they do not have any credentials. And that can be a little scary. So that's kind of my little tax tip for today. If you guys could like and subscribe, I would appreciate it. And I will see you guys in the next video.